Welcome to another episode of Trade Australia. I'm your host, Lawrence Christoffels. Today's episode is all about Africa. There are some incredible opportunities taking place right across Africa. And we've got a really special guest who is Judy Nkweti, who is the CEO of TourVest, and she's also the chair of ABCSA, Australian Business Chamber, Southern Africa. Judy, thanks so much for joining us on today's show.
Uh, Thank you for having me, and I am very, very excited because I'm one of those South Africans who spent my formative adult life in Australia. I left South Africa shortly after I graduated, and so the first 20 years of my working life was spent in Australia.
Wonderful. So you know Australia, especially Sydney, extremely well then, Judy. Judy, on that note, could you please summarise the current trade and investment relationship between Southern Africa and Australia?
You know, what was very interesting was, as I prepared for this interview, I had no idea that the outward flow of capital in terms of investment from South Africa into Australia is double the investment Australia into South Africa. And so I suppose that is my first takeout, my first point, is that perception often is reality. And so often perception distorts reality, because who would have thought to the 200,000 recent immigrants to Australia from South Africa, I think they need to be very aware of the fact that investment from South Africa sits at 9.2 billion Aussie dollars, and the investment into South Africa from Australia is 4.6 Aussie dollars. So literally double. 200,000 recent immigrants to Australia from South Africa. I think they need to be very aware of the fact that investment from South Africa sits at 9.2 billion Aussie dollars, and the investment into South Africa from Australia is 4.6 Aussie dollars. So literally double.
Wow, some incredible statistics there, Judy. Much more than most of us probably realise between Australia and South Africa.
Yes. And I mean, maybe we can unpack some of the information as well with regard to what kind of goods and services makes up the trade between South Africa and Australia. So exports from South Africa, top is aluminum ores. And secondly, it's something that I also, once again, was very astounded by, is there is the second highest export is confidential items of trade. So maybe on your business show, you can unpack that and try and get the information as to what is this confidential items of trade, because certainly from a South African point of view, we have what's called the POPI Act, which makes you can get public, you have access to information. But I didn't have time to go and apply some of the provisions within the law. And maybe this is going to be my second takeout, that if you look at the two sectors in South Africa that perform extremely, extremely well globally, then that is our financial services and our legal services. We are regarded, or South Africa is certainly regarded, I should say we, because now people will think I'm talking as an Australian South African or South African Australian. So let me first say that South African financial services and legal services are amongst the best in the world. And very interestingly, too, when you look at the Australian businesses and the Australian ecosystem around business, you will find that some of the most prominent Australians who occupy top positions in Australia are actually South Africans, both in financial services and in some of the top law firms in Sydney. I can preface that by saying, I mean, I know Sydney, I live in Sydney, I have a house in Sydney, and some of the top partners in law firms are actually South Africans in Australia. Third, in terms of top exports to Australia, is coal. Interesting. we are obsessed at the moment globally with the just energy transition. So this is not a show about that energy and green energy, but Australia, certainly, I think later on you'll ask me around areas of opportunity, then I definitely think the hydrogen economy is an area where South Africa and Australia can partner very, very seriously. And while I'm on that tangent, also to talk about the Square Kilometre Array, the SCAR project, when initially South Africa was going to win that huge satellite program, it's the leading global program, again, part of the Afro-pessimism or African pessimism around the world, which for me is really just racism. Was around that South Africa was not going to be awarded that major project. And we then partnered, South Africa partnered with Australia. So whenever the business community and the energy community from Australia comes to South Africa, they go and visit the Square Kilometre Array, because that, of course, is groundbreaking and ground changing for the world. So just on that little segue there, coal, energy, hydrogen, and of course, Australia and South Africa partners around the Square Kilometre Array. Now, let's just for a moment talk about aluminium and coal. There's this internecine relationship between Australia and South Africa, that some of the top mining companies in South Africa, often the top leadership is Australian, and the South African acquired mining entities in Australia, you'll find that the South Africans then go to Australia and they run those mining entities. And we just, one of the most highly respected and highly regarded mining engineers in the world is now the recently retired Anglo CEO Mark Rushafani. And for people on your show, Mark had come to South Africa. He's from Wollongong. And the equivalent of Wollongong in South Africa is Palabora, for me anyway. Maybe other people in the mining sector will have a different view, but areas that are defined by mining, and there's a special breed of worker that comes from those areas. And Mark moved to South Africa when he was not CEO of Anglo. He was at another mining company. So there you see, again, an Australian in South Africa. It's not sort of that song, an Englishman in New York. It's an Australian in South Africa and a South African in Australia. So mining and coal. And then next, in terms of export, number 4 is professional, technical, and other business services. Again, a very strong relationship at a skill level between the two countries. And I'm going to come to that later when we talk about unemployment. And then education-related travel, which is a huge contributor to the GDP. Precious metals, ores, again, excluding gold. So 3 out of the major export commodities are in the mining sector. And then transport services.
Wow. Judy, really well explained, and thanks for going into that detail, because you're 100% right. The bilateral relationships and the crossover between the mining, legal, those service-based businesses, there are a lot of Australians doing great work over there, and vice versa, a lot of South Africans doing wonderful work here in Australia. So really interesting points, and probably, again, a bit of a surprise to many in Australia, but when you're really out in the community, when you think about it, even now, I can think of so many other South African people that I've come across through networking and other events doing great things here.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, what for me, again, was very interesting, or is very interesting from an export-import point of view, is that when you look at Australia's goods and services trade, imports into South Africa, number 1 is passenger motor vehicles, which took me by surprise. Again, I haven't had time to unpack that, but South Africa was always regarded as a major player in the automotive space, whether it is Ford, Mercedes-Benz, BMW. South Africa at the moment makes one of the end-to-end, one of Mercedes-Benz top of the range C-class cars. Ford, incidentally, also invested huge amounts of money in South Africa. And I'm not a Ford driver, so you will have to forgive me, but it is a bakkie. You know, obviously in South Africa and in Australia, when you go into the outback or into the bush, you need these sturdy vehicles, both from a farming point of view, agriculture, and then again, just going into the bush for South Africa, which are our beautiful, the beautiful game reserve, the passenger motor vehicles. And then second, in terms of imports, is recreational travel. And I think there too is a big opportunity that whilst the market is dominated by visiting family and friends, I always say to Australians coming to South Africa, or the South Africans who are now Australians coming to South Africa, bring at least, if there are 4 of you, bring 4 Australians, not South African Australians, bring 4 of them to South Africa so that they can experience the magic and the, you know, the magic and the magic and majestic elements of South Africa. So recreational travel is number 3. Then a common area, export is number 4, but import is number 3. Again, professional tech and other business services. Then specialized machinery and parts. So especially in the mining sector, we as the Australian Business Chamber in South Africa, we are really wanting to look at some of those downstream opportunities where we believe that there should be increased movement of goods and services in the specialized machinery and parts business, transport services again, and then mechanical handling equipment and parts. So that gives you an idea of the top 6, 7 areas of goods and services that are traded both in and out of our 2 respective countries. Well, I mean, Australia is an island, it's an island, and we just a country on the continent.
You mentioned ABSCO already. You're the chair there, the Australian Business Chamber of Southern Africa. Please elaborate on a bit of that and what you're doing with your role and those initiatives, please, Judy.
Certainly. So let's deal with ABSCO, because ABSCO is really an advocacy group, for lack of a better word. So we ensure that Australian businesses and companies who are in South Africa doing business, that we kind of, it's a home for them. First and foremost, a home for like-minded people who find themselves in South Africa and working in the SADC region. So it's a place of safety. It's a place where you can connect. It's a place and a space where you can speak off the record, but on the record. And it allows you to share your observations, or when business people come to, you know, irrespective of which country you go to as an expat, you need spaces where you can share your observations, share your insight, share your experiences, and seek assistance when so needed. So that really is, in a nutshell, what we do. We provide thought leadership opportunities for our members. And by that, I mean, so most recently, we hosted the Auditor General of South Africa, looking at, by the way, which again, I didn't know, that our Auditor General, the Office of the Auditor General in South Africa is in the top 5 globally. We have no shortage of Black accountants. And the Auditor General is a Black female CA, highly skilled. And so we hosted her, and again, our members were humbled by the expertise of this particular woman, and they were inspired. I mean, they were gobsmacked by her intellect, her expertise, and her grasp of the role of auditing as a profession. Just a little bit of a segue here, you know, accounting firms all over the world have fell into a little bit of disrepute as a result of corruption, not only accounting firms. And yeah, I do want to talk about Bain Consulting, because they've been banned in the UK. South Africa hasn't followed suit. but I think there are moves afoot to mete out harsher treatment of their collusion in the corruption situation here in South Africa. So we then also, of course, hosted MARC, and we attracted not only our members, but the business community. So on the one hand, it is a space for the members, but it's also a space for the business and community to come together. When you host someone like Mark Kurtafani or someone like the Auditor General, then everybody wants to come and kind of bask in the sun, to coin a phrase. And I suppose because of my duality, I am very plugged into the South African and the African business community. So just a little bit of the High Commissioner here in South Africa always says, if there's anyone that can get anyone to come and speak at an event, it's Judy. But I haven't delivered the Australian Prime Minister yet, nor the South African President. So I would say that, you know, my ranking in terms of being able to bring people to the table is not that impressive.
Well, I'm sure, Judy, if anyone can get the new Australian Prime Minister over there, it's definitely probably going to be you.
And I think the other highlight we held with the Office of the President in South Africa, we held a very important critical dialogue around the hydrogen economy, because as you would know, and even in Australia, we have to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. So again, and interestingly, the leading CEO in the hydrogen space, Natasha Viljoen, her entire family live in Queensland, and she's now running one of the top mining companies here in South Africa. Interesting, she's a woman. The new CEO at Exxaro is a woman. So I think, you know, South Africa once again is able to demonstrate their leadership in some areas like gender equity. It's not perfect, but, you know, even if you look at our Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the chairperson of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is a mathematician, a Black female. I think, I don't know, pure maths, applied maths, American University. And the current CEO used to work in Australia, Leila Khan. So again, you see, it's almost as if there's a shuttle between the two countries. It's a 20-odd hour shuttle, depending on how you fly. But there's sort of this, you know, in terms of talent, there's a pipe that connects the two countries. So enough about ABSCA. I think you get a sense of what we do. When it came to mining and a force majeure that was issued by Rio Tinto, again, Canada, the UK, Australia banded together, and I facilitated dialogues as ABSCA so that we speak as a collective and we don't alienate or isolate any one business. So enough about ABSCA. Now, my other love, which is travel and tourism, and I think this is where there's a great opportunity as well for the two countries, and that is around food and fashion and film. At one stage, the CEO of the Sydney Film Festival was a South African. So once again, you see prominence and dominance by South Africans in the Australian environment, not so much the same here. So, I mean, those are South Africans that are now living in Australia who are leaders in those respective fields. So Tourvest is a global leader. It is a unique business in that we run 5 divisions. It's a federated model. Each division has its own P&L, and we play in the entire value chain when it comes to tourism and eventually our long-term goal, which COVID, of course, certainly made us realize that we need to work faster on our vision of being the world's leading technology company in tourism. So at the moment, we have our own software and our own IP in the travel management space. It is an expense travel management system can compare and compete with any of the world's leading, firms when it comes to Sage and Pastel, etc. Concur. So we have what's called travel IT. So watch that space. Australians from an investment point of view. And we have a business in destination management. We are considered Tourvest one of the world's leaders in travel retail. We have the British Airways account for buy on board. We also run a financial services business because when you travel to some parts of the world, cash is still queen. And then we have an accommodation and activities business. So that's Tourvest. Our accommodation and activities business, our brands are globally recognized, and we are in Uganda. We are the only company or the only tourism product that is in the middle of the Nile. So the Nile, there's a confluence of the Black and the Blue Nile, and our lodge is in the middle of the Nile. It is a must-do. It is one of the world's most spectacular places to visit. And of course, the Nile is very spiritually, irrespective of your religion, the Nile has particular point of reference, biblically speaking. So people are fascinated by the Nile, and from whether you're coming from Egypt all the way down, the Nile washes the sands of Ethiopia, Uganda. There's a big dam being built there at the moment. 5 countries are involved. And then we are in the Serengeti. We have beautiful, beautiful lodges in the Serengeti.
Wow.
And the places we've come to doing business in the specific area, before COVID, we bought a business in New Zealand. And of course, that business took the hardest hit because of the New Zealand government's approach to COVID. And as you would know, it's literally one of the last countries that have opened up, together with Japan and places like that. And Tourvest has operations in the Caribbean. We closed a business in India recently. We ran in India what was called out of Mumbai. These fabulous shops at airports, and that really is what Tourvest is all about. It's both a product business and a channel business.
Wow.
And the vision really, it's a 27-year-old business. It's owned by a Black South African. And I use these words very deliberately because of attempts to, the important imperative of South Africa normalizing both business and society to reflect the demographics of the country and the inequalities that, those structural inequalities of our past. We're 27, 28 years old. There is no way you can restructure an economy and a country that was built on the systemic and endemic practices of apartheid. And I don't think we'll ever be able to do away with the geographical apartheid, because how do you move millions of people? Came to South Africa, they took the land, they moved people off the land, and that's what you sit with, because you can't. I mean, Sao Paulo was a very interesting experiment when they raised the favelas and moved people. But so anyway, South Africa is grappling with land issues, the redistribution of land, occupation of land. I mean, when I left South Africa, I couldn't own land. I couldn't buy land. In fact, my parents' land was taken away from them. So my maternal and paternal land that was owned, we don't own it anymore. It was taken away from us. So subject for another day.
It's incredible journey and story that I'd love to explore with you and continue talking to you. I'm sure I could speak to you for hours, Judy, on many other topics. I'm mindful of your time, and I know that you've got another appointment to rush to. So just to wrap up today's episode, I'd like to ask you what tips and advice you'd like to give Australian companies wanting to do business with South Africa or into the market for the first time.
I think you need to come to South Africa. You need to visit South Africa. You have to meet South Africans in the business community. And I will guarantee you, you will not want to leave. You know, we live here, we love here, and our lived reality bears out a different experience. Our lived experiences here is not what many Australians would want to believe is what South Africa is all about. We have our challenges, and the world has challenges at the moment, fuel and food being the top two. Australia likes that other word. It's a swear word. I won't say the 3 Fs, but I'm sure many of people are saying they are effing tired of the increases in food and fuel. So come and visit and see for yourself. That is the only way you will understand a country. And it is awash with opportunities, awash with opportunities. And you can come and make your friends here in South Africa.
Thanks so much, Judy. I know you're a very busy lady, and I really genuinely appreciate taking the time out to talk with me on the Trade Australia show. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege. I look forward to staying in touch and hopefully one day even meeting in person in the future. So take care. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on your show.
So there you have it. You've heard so much. There's so many opportunities still untapped for Australian companies looking at South Africa, and vice versa for that matter as well. There's already established strong relations, great things in common. And Judy Norquetti, who's the chair of APSCA there, would love to help all of you make sure you can tap into that market and have that support needed. So thanks so much for watching the Trade Australia episode on South Africa today. Best of luck with your future endeavours, and tune in for another episode of Trade Australia very soon. Take care.